What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we've got our Week 2 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. And we kick off Week 2 with the Giants at Washington. And here, in terms of starters for the Giants, I've got two names, Sterling Shepard and Kenny Golladay. Shepard obviously had the big performance last week. Now, I'm not anticipating this to be the case every single performance in and out, especially when you consider the matchup here versus a very stout defense. But look, as far as a low-end wide receiver, 2 high-end wide receiver, 3, especially in PPR formats, you could do worse than Sterling Shepard. So from that perspective, I don't mind it. And then Kenny Golladay, more of that standard suited wide receiver. What you're looking from Golladay is, I would say, about 4 to 6 receptions for 60 to 80 yards, and hopefully you get a touchdown in there. That's the type of performer he has been brought in to be for the Giants, kind of what he did with the Lions, but obviously not as high of an upside because it's Daniel Jones versus Matthew Stafford. But I still think in standard formats, he is all right. Then for Washington, Terry McLaurin, pretty much the only wide receiver I'm interested in, primarily because, well, Ryan Fitzpatrick is out, so it's the Heineke show for the foreseeable future, at least for the next couple of weeks. And with that being the case, I think that limits the upside of this offense. But McLaurin is so good that I'd still be starting him. However, I don't think he belongs in the wide receiver 1 conversation at this point in time. I think he's more of a wide receiver 2, mid-level wide receiver 2, kind of stingy defense here. I just don't believe in Heineke. I think from time to time he puts together some pretty good plays, but consistency, playing a full 4 quarters, is his issue, in my opinion. However, McLaurin would still be my preferred wide receiver start in this matchup. And then I'm sitting Darius Slayton. Look, I don't think that the Giants can sustain more than 2, and even that might be optimistic, fantasy-relevant wide receiver. Slayton, in my opinion, the guy that's looking on the inside out. And then with Washington, same situation. Without Fitzpatrick, I'm really not interested in anyone other than Terry McLaurin. Moving on, we've got the Raiders at the Steelers. Here, I'll honestly probably take a chance on all the Steeler wide receivers. The way I have them listed is kind of my preference for them all. Deontay Johnson, we saw it last year. We saw it in Week 1. He is the top target for the Steelers, gets the most amount of volume, and that's what makes him a mid to high-end wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. Then Chase Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster, I think normally I'd list one of these 2 guys only, but this is a positive matchup versus the Raiders defensively, who still have things to clean up, giving up points like we saw versus the Ravens. And Claypool, more of that standard suited wide receiver, while Juju Smith-Schuster in that PPR type of situation, low-end wide receiver through 2 in that wide receiver 3 category. Hopefully, he gets you something like between 6 and 8 receptions. The yardage won't be all that pretty. But then, a touchdown on top of that would be just great. For the Raiders, I really don't want to start anyone here. Bryan Edwards, Hunter Renfrow, Henry Ruggs, those are the 3 names to know. Yes, Bryan Edwards kind of at the end of the game versus the Ravens had a quote-unquote big outing, but he literally did that at the end of the 4th quarter and partially in overtime. Other than that, he played, 3.5 quarters where he did absolutely jack. Same with Henry Ruggs. In fact, there was a point in time where the fullback for the Raiders had more receptions than both of those guys. Hunter Renfrow, I think, usually maybe take a chance on him, but this is, again, a very tough matchup here versus the Steelers. Another reason why I don't really love any of the wide receivers for the Raiders. And honestly, if you're forcing me to pick a wide receiver for the Raiders, it's going to be Darren Waller. And the guy isn't even a wide receiver. It's a tight end. You saw what type of volume he got. Everyone else is, I don't even want to say a secondary option, probably a tertiary option for this Raiders offense. That's how much they, kind of revolve around Darren Waller. Moving on, we've got the 49ers at the Eagles. I'm listing both Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk here. Look, last week we told you Deebo Samuel would be a wide receiver one. Hopefully you listen to us, because with these other guys, specifically Brandon Ayuk here, coming back from hamstring injuries, even if they are available, they might be used as decoys and not get their typical volume. That's kind of what we saw with Ayuk. Now, I do have him as a tentative start, but here it's a situation where you really do have to track his injury status. If you want to be more conservative, I would say probably sit him again, because, again, these hamstrings can be tricky, and it's not a guarantee that he's going to once again get his full workload, because, I mean, for God's sakes, he is coming off a goose egg, and a lot of people were burned by him. But when he is on the field and when he is getting looks and plays his normal role in this offense, we remember what he did late last season. So I still think he has a role to play. Maybe it's a week too early, but with Brandon Ayuk, as long as he's healthy, as those injury reports aren't trending in the wrong direction, I think you can get some value from him. Then for the Eagles, Devonta Smith. I said it last week, Devonta Smith's really the only wide receiver option that I want for the Eagles. Yes, Jalen Reagor had a touchdown, but it was on a quick little screen pass. I don't want to have to rely on that. Smith has the highest upside, in my opinion, in that wide receiver 2 category. And then I will say, if Brandon Ayuk does play, to some extent that does lower Deebo Samuel's upside, even though, Samuel obviously had a monster game in week 1, but that was more so because, again, Ayuk really didn't do anything. So the biggest takeaway here, just keep an eye out injury-wise for Brandon Ayuk if there are any new announcements. Afterwards, Texans at the Browns. I'm starting Brandon Cooks. I said it before, really, he's going to be the only Houston Texan wide receiver that I want to start week in and week out, and he's just going to get the volume. That's what it boils down to, over 100 yards. If you get a touchdown, he'll be in the wide receiver 1 category. This is a matchup where the Texans are going to have to throw a bunch, so I do believe Cooks will have opportunities as well. But anyone else on this Houston offense, I really don't even want to waste my time with. Yes, Danny Amendola had success in week 1. That was versus the Jaguars. I wouldn't go chasing points here. Again, Brandon Cooks, really the only fantasy viable wide receiver on this offense. For the Browns, Landry and Odell Beckham if he plays. If Odell plays, this is a good matchup. I think the Browns are definitely going to have more success versus the Texans than the Jaguars did. And if Beckham doesn't play, then Jarvis Landry, probably a high-end wide receiver 2 in PPR formats. So I like that there. If both of them play, probably low-end wide receiver 2s, that entire duo. Afterwards, Broncos at the Jaguars. Really not my favorite matchup as far as fantasy wide receivers to choose from. For the Broncos, without Jerry Jeudy, I'm looking at Courtland Sutton and then Tim Patrick / KJ Hamler. I think with Patrick and with Hamler, it's kind of a coin flip who you go with. You could argue that this could be a week where you start all of them versus the Jaguars, who looked absolutely awful. But honestly, I think the person that kind of most benefits from Jerry Jeudy's absence could be Noah Fant at the tight end position. I think he does get a nice bump up there, because I continue to say it, with Teddy Bridgewater under center, I just struggle to see all 3 of these wide receivers being fantasy relevant. But if there is a week that it could happen, it would be here versus the Jaguars. I just wouldn't get too cute with it at this point in time. Like I said, I don't really love the fantasy wide receiver options here. For the Jaguars, Marvin Jones and DJ Shark, this is a tough matchup. And the Jaguars, let's be honest, they looked awful in week 1. I don't know how much it had to do with the players themselves, or maybe more so with Urban Meyer and the game plan that he had. Either way, though, I'd kind of be concerned. Normally, again, you can make a case that you could start 3 of these wide receivers, Marvin Jones, Shark, and Chanel. They all had decent outings in week 1. But again, that was versus the Texans. This is Broncos, much stingier defense. Marvin Jones for the Jaguars continues to be my favorite wide receiver of the bunch. And DJ Shark, even though he had only 3 receptions last week, he got 12 targets, which was by far and away the most. Now, obviously, that's not a good conversion rate in terms of catches, so that is concerning. But if you follow that trend and there's volume for Shark yet again, not a bad play, but to me here, I don't think there's a single guy that's even a high-end wide receiver 2. You're kind of, hoping one of these guys hits with a touchdown. And honestly, if you force me to pick one of these two sides, which wide receivers I'd rather start, I'd probably go with Marvin Jones and DJ Chark because I like the talent there better. Next up, Saints at the Panthers. Here we're getting a little bit frisky, maybe a little bit too optimistic, but I'd start both Deontay Harris and Marquez Callaway. Last week was kind of a fluke situation for the Saints where they didn't have to do all that much, yet Jameis Winston still had 5 touchdowns through the air, but only had, I believe, like 15 completed passes, which is pretty insane. So on a third of his passes, he was throwing a touchdown. That's crazy. A lot of it was to tight ends. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case every single week. I think we're going to see a classic Jameis Winston performance here. And what I mean by that is he's going to be airing it out. The Panthers struggle with speed in the secondary. That's why I kind of think Harris has some decent upside. And I do think we might see more of what we're hoping for in Marquez Callaway this week as well. But I'd have both of them kind of in that low-end wide receiver 2 category. But one of them could surprise. For the Panthers, DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Moore kind of proved himself to be the top wide receiver for Sam Darnold in terms of, who's going to get the targets last week. Now, albeit it was versus the Jets, and the Jets looked awful. The Saints, they are a bit banged up in the secondary, but they are a much stiffer challenge, so keep that in mind. And then Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall. I do think this is probably going to be a coin flip for a big portion of the season, and Anderson only did have 1 catch. Now, it helped that it was like a 50-plus yard touchdown last week, which made his stats look better. So you might be wondering why we're starting him here. And simply put, I think that when it comes to more challenging matchups like the Saints present here, let's not kid ourselves, Darnold is going to look to his more experienced wide receivers, and Robbie Anderson gets the nod over Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall got some more looks than Robbie Anderson last week, but you saw some rookie mistakes, you saw some drops, you saw some tentativeness. So as much as I like Marshall, I think he's probably going to be a guy that we're going to be talking more about as the season progresses. Following this, we've got the Rams at the Colts, and I'm only looking at the duo of the Rams here, Woods and Cooper Kupp. And yes, I know Kupp kind of blew Woods out of the water in week 1 in terms of performances, but that's kind of to some extent going to be a situation back and forth that happens from time to time. Like one week, Woods is going to have the really big week and Cooper Kupp going to be a little bit quieter. Other weeks, it'll be Kupp. And then from time to time, they'll both have really good outings. But either way, I'm not sitting any of them. I think they both belong. Worst case scenario, like mid-level wide receiver 2s, and they've got the wide receiver 1 upside. You saw with Kupp last week, so I really like that. I'm sitting Van Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson. To me, this offense, Kupp and Woods are the 2 alphas, and then unless you get just one big play from Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson, they won't have too much success. The Colts defense, I do think it's an average to an above average unit. And I just don't want to bank on those big plays with Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson. And then I'm also sitting Pascal and Michael Pittman. Look, the Rams absolutely shut down Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney in week 1. And I think Pascal and Pittman are kind of lesser wide receivers. So I'd rather sit them both. I think Jalen Ramsey is going to shut down completely one of these guys. And all in all, the Rams defense is absolutely awesome. So I'm really worried here about the pass catchers for the Colts. Next up, we got the Bills at the Dolphins. I'm starting Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley. Diggs, by his standards, had a kind of tough outing in week 1, but he was facing the Steelers, for God's sake, so we can give him a pass. He's still in the wide receiver 1 category, top 5 guy. Cole Beasley, I will say, I was impressed. I thought Emmanuel Sanders could be that wide receiver too, but you saw when Josh Allen, he needed the big plays, he needed the completions. He went to Cole Beasley, his trusted guy. He was absolutely peppered with targets, and I do think that will bring some serious value in PPR formats. Then for the Dolphins, I'm looking at Will Fuller. He's eligible to come back this week from a suspension, and I just don't think the Dolphins are going to be able to sustain multiple fantasy-relevant wide receivers. Yes, I know Waddle had some success last week, as did Parker, but once Fuller is there, to me, he is the best wide receiver out of that trio. And the Dolphins, not necessarily the most pass-heavy team. We saw it last week. The Bills, kind of a stingy defense as well. So I'd roll with Fuller here, but I think you're going to probably be looking at a low-end wide receiver too for whoever emerges here. I don't see two top-notch wide receivers from the Dolphins. Much rather roll here with the Buffalo pass catchers. Next up, Patriots at the Jets. I really like all the Patriots pass catchers, period. Really all their offensive weapons. I love their defense because the Jets looked god-awful in week one. Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers, I think I said it last week with Corey Davis that he could be a wide receiver one, similar to Deebo Samuel. That ended up being the case. Well, I'm saying that for Nelson Aguilar and Jacoby Myers. Mac Jones looked good. This Jets defense looks awful from what we saw versus the Panthers. Aguilar and Jacoby Myers, I wouldn't be shocked if they both have like close to 15, over 15 points. So to me, they're both high-end wide receiver twos. Corey Davis, I'd only start him here, but I think he has much, much lower upside than what he did in week one versus the Panthers. This Patriots defense, very solid, and these two teams, divisional foes, they know each other well. I really would be, hesitant with Corey Davis if you're looking to get a similar type of performance. I still think he has the highest upside out of all these wide receivers. That's why I've got Crowder and Elijah Moore as sits. I don't think we're going to see two fantasy-relevant wide receivers in this matchup from the Jets. Even if Crowder plays, he's coming back from COVID, maybe not 100%, so keep that in mind. And then Elijah Moore, I think he just had some early struggles. And if Crowder plays, then I'm completely fading him here. But even if he doesn't, Corey Davis is still the only guy that I'd be taking a shot at. And I think he's probably a mid to low end wide receiver two on the week. Next up, Bengals at the Bears. Really, I like all the wide receivers here, to be honest with you. The Bears, even though, the perception is monsters of the midway, a good defense, their secondary is problematic. We saw it in week one with Cooper Kupp, Van Jefferson, kind of burning that group. And the Bengals trio of T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd, I think could have success here. I still think that the Bengals are a pass-heavy team. T. Higgins continues to be the wide receiver one for me, in my opinion, out of this bunch. Very nice to see Jamar Chase come out and put those preseason struggles behind him. He was very solid, and I think that Higgins and Jamar Chase are low to mid-level wide receiver twos, and Tyler Boyd in PPR formats could be a nice sleeper. For the Bears, Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney are going to have a much, much easier matchup here versus the Bengals. I guess Andy Dalton revenge game, not that that really means anything. The point of the story is both Robinson and Mooney got targeted heavily in week one versus the Rams. This Bengals defense can't hold a handle to that Rams defense. So I think Robinson and Mooney will both convert a lot more of those opportunities. I see Robinson as a wide receiver one, Mooney as, a wide receiver two. Following this, Falcons at the Bucks. I'll start Calvin Ridley. Look, I get it. The Falcons looked absolutely awful offensively in week one, and that raises some questions for everybody. But Calvin Ridley is still a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, in my opinion. This is, albeit, going to be a tough matchup, so I wouldn't be shocked if Calvin Ridley struggles to put up wide receiver one numbers here because, again, you have to look at the matchups. I'd probably be expecting high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 production from Ridley. For the Bucks, though, man, I love the opportunities for all the wide receivers here. Godwin, love him in PPR. I think he's got wide receiver 1 upside. Mike Evans in standard formats. Yes, I know he was extremely quiet in week 1. I think he bounces back in a big way here versus the Falcons. And Antonio Brown, I continue to say it. I think he was the best value out of all these 3 wide receivers. I think he's a mid to high-end wide receiver 2. And then for the Falcons, I'm sitting Russell Gage. The guy didn't have a single catch in week 1, and I think this is a much tougher matchup versus the Bucks here. So I'm fading him in this matchup in week 2. Next up, Vikings at the Cardinals. I'll start Justin Jefferson. I'll start Adam Thielen. I think this could be a high-scoring game. Thielen actually outscored Justin Jefferson in week 1. A lot of that touchdown success that he had last year, well, we saw it in week 1, so that's nice to see. Jefferson is still, in my opinion, the higher upside guy, but Thielen also high-end wide receiver too, which you got to love. For the Cardinals, man, Kyler Murray looked awesome. From what we said, again, leading up to the season, Kyler Murray could be the quarterback 1. He's going to be an MVP candidate. Sure seems that way. And again, I get it. It's only 1 week, but The body of work is there for him if you look at last season as well. Hopkins is a wide receiver 1. This matchup versus the Vikings doesn't scare me. Christian Kirk, again, he was somebody that we pointed to as a start last week. He had a huge game. Now, I'm not anticipating that every single week, but the fact of the matter is, if Kyler Murray plays at an MVP level, there's going to be another very good wide receiver here other than DeAndre Hopkins. And out of all the guys, Kirk, Rondale Moore, and A.J. Green, I like Kirk's upside the most. He's most familiar with Kyler Murray, with the system, so I give him the edge here. Again, it's going to be some boom or bust type of situations with Kirk, but if you're looking for upside in the second wide receiver here for the Cardinals, Kirk gets my nod above Rondale Moore and A.J. Green, who, in my opinion, are guys that maybe come on later on in the season for the Cardinals. Afterwards, Titans at the Seahawks. I'm starting both duos here, A.J. Brown and Julio for the Titans, even though they're both coming off, let's put it bluntly, very bad performances. Brown, his performance was saved by a touchdown. Julio Jones, absolutely awful, but how much of that was his fault? How much was it just the Titans offensively looking horrible? But I think they should be able to bounce back. This will be interesting. This will be a storyline that we're paying a lot of attention to because there's a lot of big names here for the Titans fantasy football-wise. A.J. Brown, Julio, Derrick Henry, potentially Ryan Tannehill. I think that, the Seahawks defense, even though it's a decent unit, I think that the Titans can have success versus them. A.J. Brown, I have him ranked higher here. I think he still has low-end wide receiver 1 upside. Julio Jones is the guy that I'm really interested in. I mean, on talent alone, he could be a low-end wide receiver 1. But I think depending on usage, he's probably in the low-end wide receiver 2 category. For the Seahawks, Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, high-end wide receiver 2s, the both of them. You saw what we were talking about with Lockett. The guy has huge upside. Wouldn't be shocked if he ends up outscoring DK Metcalf yet again. And honestly, on the season period, the Titans defense looked awful. So the upside for both of these guys, very, very nice. Then Cowboys at the Chargers. I love every single wide receiver here. Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb for the Cowboys. Michael Gallup will miss some time, so these two guys should eat. I think they've got high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 upside. Because, I think the Cowboys without Michael Gallup will more so lean on Cooper on Lamb, throw in some of the tight ends, look at Zeke, but Lamb and Cooper should be the biggest beneficiaries. For the Chargers, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. I love the matchup versus this Cowboys defense. I think this is going to be a very high-scoring affair, and this matchup for the Chargers much easier than what it was in Week 1 versus Washington. Love what I saw from Mike Williams in Week 1. If his usage continues to trend that way and the targets continue to trend that way, I think Mike Williams can be an absolute superstar this season. And honestly, I'm picking him as a sleeper wide receiver 1 on this Week 2. Following this, Chiefs at the Ravens. Tyreek Hill is pretty much going to be the only Chief wide receiver you start every single week. You saw it last week in a shootout versus the Browns. Hardman and Demarcus Robinson were non-factors. It was Tyreek Hill as always, and then Travis Kelce. That was pretty much it. That's going to continue to be the case. Hill is a wide receiver 1. The Ravens, I said it before, I think this will be a high-scoring affair versus the Chiefs. I'm starting both Sammy Watkins and Marquise Brown. I think they've got mid-level wide receiver 2 upside. They had some success Week 1 versus the Raiders. Rashad Bateman's still out. And, these are the top 2 guys here for the Ravens. And I think they'll benefit from some decent volume and the game script in general versus the Chiefs, where the Ravens are going to have to pass a bunch to get it done. Then Lions at the Packers. This is tough for the Lions because pretty much exactly what we said for the Lions holds true in Week 1. And that is, passing-wise, they're going to look to T.J. Hockenson and their 2 running backs, Swift and Jamal Williams. So it's tough to pick out a wide receiver here, but I still contend that there's going to be a top 30 wide receiver in this Detroit wide receiver group because their defense is so bad. They're just built to pass the football a bunch. And from what we saw in Week 1, Quintez Cephas was a guy that got the most volume, so I'm going to roll with that here in Week 2. It's kind of a coin flip situation. Maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of emerges as the season progresses. Wasn't all that impressed from Tyrell Williams. Again, I still think it'll be Hockenson and the 2 running backs that kind of do the majority of the heavy lifting here. That's why I'm limiting my expectations for the wide receivers for the Lions. For the Packers, Devontae Adams, locked and loaded wide receiver 1. Everybody on the Packers will have a bounce back performance. Trust me, it happens. Every once in a while, Just one game, the Packers have a bad outing every year. Last year, you can point to the Bucs game. This year, to the Saints game. Everybody just had an aberration of a game. I expect Rodgers, Adams, Aaron Jones, all of those guys to have a huge performance here. This Lions defense is awful. So Adams is probably going to be a top 3 wide receiver on the week. But then I'm sitting Lazard and MVS. If you're looking for one of these guys for a high upside, then I probably go MVS because the way he's used on those deep plays down the field. But I don't want to get too cute here. I think it's going to be a formula that's pretty simple. Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, maybe some Randall Cobb. So I think just the next wide receivers are too inconsistent for the Packers. That's why I would be fading them here. But with that, we wrap up our Week 2 fantasy football wide receiver start and sit breakdown. And as always, let us hear in the comment section, did you agree, disagree? Along with any questions you guys might have, we will do our best to answer them all. And if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.